New videos every day. Life, wisdom.
So back to the idea of, they say, oh, it's the mental illness. The person committed this crime because of the mental illness. We have some previous videos where we talked more about the pathology of these different mental illnesses and the fact that there really is no biological basis for diagnosing these different mental illnesses or even identifying a person with one of these mental illnesses. So in terms of using these psychiatric meds that are now being shown to, even though it's relatively rare incidents, we're seeing more of these incidents of extreme violence on these drugs, that the drugs are being prescribed even though the biological basis of diagnosis or the biological basis of these disorders at all isn't known. What are the implications of that for our society as a whole or our safety?
Well, there's a little bit of a complicated issue, but just generally in medicine, you don't necessarily have to know exactly what causes a disease in order to have an effective treatment. And you don't have to necessarily know how the treatment works for it to be effective. So there's cardiac drugs where we don't exactly know what they do, but we know that they help a great deal. So what you really have to do is have empirical evidence. So you have to have proper trials, and you have to see, okay, we have this number of people who are depressed, and they're this severely depressed. Here's their scores on depression scales. We give them the drug or placebo, and what happens? Mm-hmm. So if it was a miracle cure and nobody got better on placebo and everybody got better on antidepressants, the depression melted away, but we had no idea how it worked or what the biology of the depression is, it would still be a good thing to do. Mm-hmm. So the fact that we don't understand the biology of mental illness means that we haven't proven that they're actually biological diseases at all.
Right.
The fact that we don't know exactly what the action of the drug has to do with what's going on in the brain doesn't necessarily prove that the drugs are not useful or helpful. But the real problem is when you look at the data, at the very most, the gap between drug and placebo for all psych meds is very small. And if you add in all the unpublished studies and the studies that got suppressed by drug companies, for antidepressants, the difference goes pretty much to zero, except maybe in severe depression.
Wow. So you're saying that the difference between a placebo drug, a sugar pill being used, and the actual antidepressant being used, the results on how they affect behavior is...
In terms of benefit for depression.
In terms of benefit.
It's at most, and these are just the scientific facts that are in the literature, at most, antidepressants are only slightly more effective than placebo.
Only slightly more effective.
That's the best you can say about them.
Wow.
My look at the literature is really, they're not even better, period. But in a small group of people, they have these really toxic side effects that placebo just doesn't have. Mm-hmm. So you got to do a cost-benefit analysis. And we're so bought into, quick fix for everything, pill for everything. It's a biological disease. Take a pill. It'll work. They're very effective. It's a myth. It's not the scientific facts about these meds.
Right.
And so if you look at the benefit, if the benefit is huge, we might want to tolerate a small number of mass shootings caused by drugs. But if the benefit is very little, or actually zero, then a small amount of side effects, costs, and worse, just isn't worth it.
I would definitely agree with you there. Let's talk a little bit more in detail about Andrea Yates, because this is something that this is now a good 10 years since this has happened. So there's a lot that's known about her. We would expect that somebody's behavior would be maintained, but she was released from the hospital because her insurance would no longer pay for her to stay in the hospital. So we actually had an instance of somebody being released from psychiatric care when the physician, who's actually now come out and said the physician, when they released her, did not feel that she was fit to be released, but she was released solely because her insurance would no longer cover her stay in the mental hospital. Can you speak to that at all?
Well, first of all, this is a bind that goes on all the time. The insurance company takes a position, we're not saying she does or doesn't need treatment. You're the clinicians. You're in charge of all that. All we're saying is we're not going to pay for it, which is obviously a cop-out. And it's a posture that is a basically liability avoidance posture. And then the clinicians are left with a person who's obviously not suitable for discharge. Mm-hmm. But if they keep that individual person longer, there's now pressure from the hospital administration, because if you keep too many people for too long after the insurance is willing to pay, basically the hospital goes out of business and nobody gets any treatment. Right. So this bind just goes on endlessly. And everybody's trying to, dodge liability and responsibility.
Right. And I guess for me, in terms of thinking about the collateral damage again, and especially when you make the point about, the actual effectiveness of the drugs, especially when you compare it to the placebo, that maybe it's not even that much more effective than the placebo. But then we have this situation where these patients are in a very volatile position. They're a very delicate position. And then suddenly, because of this kind of insurance, small print at the bottom of the page, she gets released and then this horrible thing happens. There's a lot of liability involved in prescribing these drugs. There's a lot of liability and as you've pointed out, people keep kind of tossing the hot potato around, kind of tossing the liability around. But it's certainly an interesting.
Well, in the last year or two, there's been multiple settlements for both civil and criminal actions against the major drug companies for psych meds in the $1 billion plus range.
Wow.
Per settlement. So this is just a measure of two things. The drug companies are clearly violating the law, and they're unethically marketing and pushing their medications. That's a fact. They're not just doing it a little bit, they're doing it at a level that results in billion-dollar judgments, which are both criminal and civil judgments. Mm-hmm. And this just kind of rolls on and rolls on and rolls on. It becomes a cost of doing business because there's so much money in this industry. Right. That you can just put a little negative mark on your third quarter statement because you had to pay out $3 billion or $2 or $1 billion.
Right.
So that's the, how much is at stake here? These huge business financial forces. And psychiatry, unfortunately, is kind of bought into protecting the status quo on this.
Right. So literally, this industry is making so much money that they just can set aside several $1 billion a year because they know that they're going to get a civil, or as you said, a civil or even criminal charges against them for the actions that they're doing on a daily basis. And so they just know they have to put this money aside because eventually they're going to get tapped on the hand at some point.
Right. And those kind of judgments don't put the company in bankruptcy. It's simply, literally a cost of doing business.
Wow. Well, thank you so much. We're going to go ahead and wrap up for today. Thank you for watching. I hope that you will subscribe to our channel. We're going to talk in future videos more about psychiatry, we're going to talk about postpartum depression in more detail. We're also going to talk about the role of medications in other behaviors, and also if these medications can really be helpful to you if you're experiencing depression or some kind of distress. Thank you so much for watching. Please be sure to give my video a thumbs up, leave a comment with any questions or video requests. For Psyche Truth, I'm Corrina Rachel. Thank you so much for watching.